A couple of months ago, we looked at a floor-standing loudspeaker from Bowers & Wilkins called the 703 S3. That was in my acoustically larger lounge room in Portugal. But here back in Berlin, I thought I would like to try the stand mount equivalent, the 705 S3. And I wanted to try it out here because I really dug the mid-range insight that the 703 S3 gave me. And I thought, yeah, a 705 S3, so a more pint-sized version in this smaller room in Berlin might be very interesting to investigate. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
This episode is brought to you by Made by Music, the new podcast from Cambridge Audio.
Welcome back, everybody. Yes, the 705 S3 is a stand mount loudspeaker from Bowers & Wilkins. It is very nicely built, but I would also say it's quite unusual looking. And that's because this is, I believe, the most affordable entry point into a stand mount loudspeaker from Bowers that has the tweeter on top design. I'm talking about the tube that sits on top of the loudspeaker. It's made of aluminium or aluminum if you live in Canada or America. And that tube houses the 1 inch or 2.5 centimeter carbon dome tweeter. Is that right? Carbon dome tweeter? Yeah, I think it is. And depending upon your point of view, you'll either see this tweeter on top as sticking out like a sore thumb, or you'll see it as I do as a classy piece of industrial design. And the tube is tapered to better dispense with the back wave of the tweeter, and the whole housing sits on top of the cabinet. So it's less likely to be negatively affected by the vibrations generated by the mid-bass driver that sits in the cabinet below. And that mid-bass driver is a 6.5 inch continuum cone that I believe is trickled down from Bowers & Wilkins' higher end models. But it's worth pointing out four things here. Firstly, that continuum cone mid-bass driver sits in its own sort of housing that sits slightly forward or slightly proud of the cabinet itself. Which means then the second thing, we also notice that the tweeter sits slightly forward of the lip of the cabinet. And Bowers have done that to align the drivers so that they are what's called time aligned. And that therefore allows the frequencies, all of the frequencies, to arrive at our ear at the listening position at the same time. At least that's the idea. The third thing we should notice here is that the front baffle is only just wide enough to accommodate the mid-bass driver and its mounting. And I believe that Bowers have done this so that basically there isn't a lot of extra sort of cabinet surface area around the driver that can colour the sound that comes out of the driver. Because sound that comes out of the driver doesn't just fly forwards, it can wrap around, I guess, whatever's nearby. So it could wrap around maybe the lip or the mounting. I think Bowers & Wilkins call it the pod that it's mounted. So it can wrap around that sort of silver ring and then arrive at the cabinet and then hit the cabinet and then fly forwards. And the fourth thing we should notice here is that the front baffle is curved. Now this is a bass reflex design. The port sits on the back, which means generally speaking, in theory at least, we need to give these loudspeakers, the 705 S3, a little bit of clearance from the front wall. I put them where I pretty much find that most speakers sound best, about 1 meter out from that front wall. And also on the back of the speakers is a very attractive chrome plate, and the binding posts look, much better than your average binding post that you find on most speakers at this price point. Oh, I should really mention the price, shouldn't I? These loudspeakers sell for €3,000 a pair. But back to those binding posts, there are 4 of them to allow for bi-wiring possibilities if that's the kind of thing that you're into. Now, when in use here, I've had the 705 S3 sitting on a pair of solid steel SS6 stands. Now I say when in use because they've been in rotation with 2 other speakers these last 8 weeks. And those other 2 pairs of speakers are the Wharfedale Linton and the Zoo DWX. So one a lot cheaper and then one a little bit cheaper. And therefore that set the stage for a pair of side-by-side comparisons, because these are the only speakers that I have here right now to conduct those side-by-side comparisons. Now at 88 dB sensitive and 8 ohm nominal impedance, the 705S3 should really be a reasonably easy drive for most amplifiers, but I took no chances here. I went with the Edge stereo power amplifier from Cambridge Audio and its matching Edge NQ streaming preamplifier. And then I added a side of vinyl playback courtesy of a Torrens TD-1500 turntable and a PS Audio Stellar phono preamp. Now the first thing that hits you right between the eyes when listening to the 705S3 is that this is an exceptionally transparent loudspeaker that really revels in digging up as much detail as it can, more so than the Linton and the DWX. And that detail delivery really comes to the fore from the mid-range, the upper mid-range, and the treble. So when honing in on the acoustic guitar and the piano that sort of underpin Lowe's Amethyst, we really hear that the Bowers & Wilkins just dig out as much detail as possible from those instruments, but without the body that we get from, or rather not without, but without as much body that we get from the Zoo or the Wharfedale. That said, the Bowers & Wilkins better separate that piano layer and that acoustic guitar layer than do the Zoo or the Wharfedale, which are larger stand mount loudspeakers. Furthermore, the 705S3 is the coolest sounding of these three loudspeaker models. And when playing some Fila Brasilia, I don't think the Bowers & Wilkins necessarily offer us as much tonal richness as do the Zoo or the Wharfedale. And they certainly aren't as dynamic sounding as the Zoo when listening to Neutral Milk Hotel. Some people, not me, might call the Bowers & Wilkins here the more accurate speaker and the Zoo the more musical speaker. But perhaps we might just call the Bowers & Wilkins 705S3 a more matter-of-fact deliverer of sound. Whatever our choice of words, I think the Bowers' more emotionally detached vibe make them a terrific choice for the pummeling techno of the Source experience. Playing some Dark Side also tells us that the sound staging from the Bowers & Wilkins 705S3 is top notch. And what that really means is that the specificity of player placement on the soundstage is much more, I guess, pinpoint accurate from the Bowers than it is the Zoo or the Wharfedale. Although once again, we should acknowledge that the Wharfedale Linton come in at nearly 1/3 of the price of the Bowers & Wilkins. And the Zoo DWX in their Supreme version that I have here sell for $2,500 US, but European buyers will obviously pay more because they have to pay shipping from the factory in Utah and also import duty and VAT. Now I had hoped that the R3 Meta from Kef would be here by now so that I could add that into the mix of side-by-side comparisons, but they're not here for whatever reason. They're delayed. Yes, I have a pair in Portugal, but I'm not going to fly all the way and then bring them back on the plane, am I? Because that would be absurd. So I have to wait for Kef to send me a loaner pair to my Berlin apartment here. So you're going to have to wait for the R3 Meta review to see how those stack up against the Bowers & Wilkins 705S3. Let's pause for a moment to talk about a recommended album. The one I want to recommend this week is actually quite simple, really. It's Talking Heads' Stop Making Sense. This is the new double vinyl LP remaster that's come out, I think, about 4 days ago. This is the first time ever that you can get the full concert, including the 2 bonus tracks of Cities and Big Business / Ezimbra, all in one place. Previously, this was available on CD. I think it came out in '99, actually, their special new edition. But neither this nor that special new edition are what I think are the best sounding versions of this album. And no, the original CD or album is also not necessarily the best version either. I'll be writing more about this on my website, so when that goes live, I'll put a link on the community page of this channel. Now, the elephant in the room for the 705S3 is the low end, or rather the lack thereof, because Bowers rate these loudspeakers at being, I think, 3 dB down at 50 Hertz. So we're kind of cut off at the knees. So the bottom octave really doesn't make an appearance at all. So sub bass and some of the low bass just doesn't show up to the party here. And the bass that does show up is delivered in a way that I think is a bit too polite. Now, of course, you could get a little bit of extra room gain, so a bit more low-end heft, by pushing the loudspeakers closer to the front wall. I did that, but only to hear really the sort of soundstage collapse on itself, so it wasn't as spacious. One thing I love about these loudspeakers is that they really invite you to almost swim in the mid-range and the upper mid-range and the treble. But all of that seems to close in on itself when the loudspeakers are pushed close to the front wall and listening to Sasha's air-drawn dagger. It's just not a satisfying experience anymore. Or rather, you gain one thing, room gain, but you lose another in terms of soundstage size and immersion and separation. So therefore, I think it's kind of pretty obvious here that more so than the Zoo, more so than the Wharfedale, these Bowers & Wilkins loudspeakers need a subwoofer. But obviously that's an extra expense. So a subwoofer in this sort of price category could add anything from $500 to $1,500 to the total cost of ownership of the 705S3 loudspeaker. And I think by that point, you might just want to go and have a look at the 703S3 floor stander. In my testing, adding the KC62 from KEF, I guess made the speakers, the Bowers & Wilkins speakers, less matter of fact and a little bit more engaging, obviously because you get the bottom end heft, you get the weight, but I think also because I'm filtering the Bowers & Wilkins' own output in implementing that subwoofer, basically adding a low pass filter to the sub and a high pass to the mains, I'm obviously benefiting from that. So that, I mean, I've covered this a bazillion times on this channel before, is if you can find an amplifier that, yeah, does that, a bit like a Blue Sound or an NAD, or in my case, a Lyngdorf, that filters both the loudspeakers and the sub, you will hear an improvement to the loudspeakers, because what it does is it takes away the bass burden from that mid bass driver, from that continuum cone. And therefore the heat doesn't build up on the voice coil. And when the heat doesn't build up on the voice coil, the impedance stays at a reasonable level and therefore doesn't induce distortions or extra distortions, which it does when it's asked to do low bass. So there are very real technical benefits to adding a sub to a two-way stand mount, and then high passing those stand mounts. God, that was a bit of a ramble. I wasn't really anticipating and doing in this video. And yes, obviously I did try other amplifiers with the 705S3 in addition to the Cambridge pre-power combo. I tried the Hegel H590 and the Lyngdorf TDAI-3400, but neither really improved the amount of bass wallop or whomp that came out of the Bowers & Wilkins stand mounts, not until I added the subwoofer. But one additional benefit of using an amplifier like the Lyngdorf, which has an internal DSP-based parametric EQ, is that I could use its internal voicings, I think I used Music 2, just to take the edge off the treble a little bit, which can get too ebullient or too lively in the Bowers & Wilkins stand mount with lesser quality recordings, lesser quality, I guess, indie rock and guitar music. And I'm thinking specifically of some of the albums made by Conor Oberst and Bright Eyes. But the finest amplifier match that I found during my testing for the 705S3 was something unexpected. It was the Prima Luna EVO 400 tube amplifier, which really did flesh things out a little bit more, and it just stopped the top end from running away with itself, which was really surprising. So maybe tubes are the way to go here. I don't really know, but maybe. Certainly the Prima Luna and the Bowers seem to be a very good match. But one thing is for sure, is that if you do go with a pair of 705S3, you're going to have to put in some extra legwork, probably more extra legwork than with most loudspeakers, to find your ideal amplifier. Because I tried, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different amplifiers, and the Prima Luna was the most satisfying sort of out of the box. The Lyngdorf obviously has its DSP, so I can sort of send that in different directions pretty easily. The Hegel H590, that was a good match, but it couldn't tame the top end with indie rock with the 705S3. And the Cambridge was pretty much the same. A good match, but again, not capable of, or not in its sort of default form, capable of taming that sort of extra liveliness up top. So really, in trying to find an amplifier for the 705S3, you're going to need something full-bodied and warm, and also preferably something with a subwoofer output in case you choose to add one down the line. Back at the other end of the frequency spectrum, I would say that these loudspeakers are also for people who really value hearing the recording space or the air in a recording, because the 705S3 are excellent in delivering that. And I think way, way better than the Zoo DWX, and certainly way, way better than the Wharfedale Linton. And that also plays out nicely in a home theatre context, in a stereo home theatre context, because I think these Bowers stand mounts are excellent for hearing sort of all of the atmospheric details when watching a movie or a character-driven drama on Netflix or on Apple TV. And in the context of movie watching and TV watching, I think the Bowers and Wilkins tend to deliver male voices with a sort of lighter, crisper tonality than do the Wharfedale Linton, which in turn add or deliver a little bit more chestiness to voices. And you can probably once again hear that my voice is not its usual self. Now, I know that this has been quite the year for me in terms of health issues, and they just keep on coming. Before it was allergies, and then it was allergies to like eye medication, and then it was the eye operation itself. And today, right now, I've got bloody COVID. So I'm having to kind of push through, to power through that to kind of make this video for you. So I don't think that the 705S3 from Bowers & Wilkins is what we would call an everyman speaker. Not at all. This is much more of a niche appeal kind of speaker to somebody who likes that sort of lighter area sound with more details that we can almost swim in. It's kind of like a big aquarium. Like the Bowers & Wilkins 705S3 paint music like, a large aquarium in front of you. There's lots to look at. And in that sense, I think for the right buyer who really values those qualities, it will put them in hog heaven. Anyway, if you liked this video, if you could tolerate my voice throughout this video, if you thought it was entertaining or informative or a bit of both, then please consider giving us a like down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, in that not everything is for everybody and that certain things have far more niche appeal than others. I guess this seems to be a bit of a theme this year. I am tackling more niche stuff. But if you dig that, then please consider subscribing to this channel. When I say niche stuff, I mean the sound of things, not the brands necessarily, because I know that Bowers & Wilkins is an enormous brand and possibly one of the best known loudspeaker brands in the world. But yeah, subscribe below if you dig all of that, and thank you ever so much for watching. Hello, me again. You're watching this video on YouTube, but if you were watching it over on Patreon, you'd be watching an extended cut with a bunch of bloopers at the end in this place where you'll see me stuff up many times. And in fact, with this video, many, many times because of my throat situation, my voice situation, my COVID situation. It isn't actually really that bad at the moment, fingers crossed. But yeah, it has made me sound pretty hoarse, and I do have, yeah, a pretty sore throat. But anyway, look, that extended version of this video is over on Patreon. If you'll consider supporting me on Patreon, even if it's just for 1 month to buy me a cup of coffee or something, or just to say thank you for this video or whatever, then I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much.